John, thank you very much for joining us this evening. The Guide and Conversation, the inaugural edition. Um, we're going to start about Russia, the Navalny issue, controversy. I suppose it depends on your perspective of what you think about it. But what exactly is Navalny's brand of politics, and what is it about that particular brand of politics that Vladimir Putin is supposed to fear so much?
Good question. Navalny is a kind of big beast, and what's exciting about him is that he's a bit crazy and he's a bit fearless, but or rather, he's a lot fearless. But anybody, and there's a lot of people on Twitter have been having a go and saying things like, well, what's he doing? Why on earth did he go back to Russia? And I want to say to those people, listen, you haven't been paying attention, because Navalny knows what happens to anybody who seriously threatens Vladimir Putin's hold on power. They may well end up dead. Now, I'm not saying this lightly for a second. I knew three Russians who were all critical to me, Vladimir Putin, deeply critical, and said when it wasn't fashionable in the West, this man, Vladimir Putin, is an enemy of democracy. He is grave trouble for Russia and the West. You mustn't trust him. Stop trying to be friends with him. And those three Russians were Anna Politkovskaya, Natasha Estemirova, and Boris Nemtsov. And all three were shot dead. Now, I've met all three, and I like them all. I also have met Navalny a couple of times, very briefly, but nevertheless, I've met him. I also Skyped him in 2016 when he was running one of his first, 2015, I think maybe, was running one of his first anti-corruption campaigns against a man called Chaika, who was then the Russian prosecutor general. Chaika, by the way, in Russian means seagull. I did Russian at school. I've got Russian O-level, but I've forgotten it all. I'm about to say something in Russian just to frighten you. Ya glupi gnom. It means I'm a stupid dwarf. And why I tell that story is silly. Anyway, but never mind. So I met Navalny on Skype 2015, 2016, whenever it was, met him twice, and he knows what's happened to those people, in particular Nemtsov. So Nemtsov was the previous effective leader of the opposition, a brilliant, very, very funny man, a lovely man, liberal to the core, who I interviewed him, Boris Nemtsov, about the crazy costs of the Russian Winter Olympics, and they built a road. The oligarchs jostling as ever for Putin's favor, or jostling to avoid Putin's disfavor, built a road from Sochi, which is on the Black Sea, up into the mountains with a ski resort, and it cost $5 billion. And I said, to ask Boris Nemtsov, what about the cost of the road? And he said, it would have been cheaper to have lined the road with Louis Vuitton handbags. Shot dead, 100 meters from the Kremlin. That's what happens.
Many of those oligarchs that you've previously mentioned, that just there now, who have residencies in the UK as we speak, Roman Abramovich to name one. Also, we have Lebedev, who is the proprietor of leading broadsheets in the country, now The Independent, digitized online. Why do you think Westminster is so circumspect about these oligarchs who have residencies in London and continue with this very vociferous anti-Kremlin rhetoric when they're very circumspect in their dealings with these alleged nefarious actors?
So I think what's happening is that Putin's Russia is a dark mirror to our society. It's a dark mirror to Russian society too, but actually it tells us something very, very dark about us. And what it tells us is we like Russian money. and we don't want to know too much of the dark history of where it comes from. So again and again and again, we're not properly looking this Russian gift horse in the mouth. Abramovich owns Chelsea, Alisher Usmanov owns Everton, or some chunk thereof. Alisher Usmanov also owns the former mansion in Surrey, owned by John Paul Getty, a beautiful Elizabethan mansion. Abramovich has got homes across London. And these are people who Navalny, the leader of the opposition, the effective leader of the opposition, who, let's remember, has been poisoned, has now been locked up on what I think is, and the European Court of Human Rights think is trumped up charges. He asks for Britain and the West to start serious sanctions against some of what he calls Putin's wallets, and Abramovich and Usmanov are the two best known because of the football teams. Now, what's happened is that the British government has said, we deplore the poisoning of Navalny that happened last year. We deplore his arrest on these charges. And about challenging the money, there is no real effective progress. So what you're getting is some kind of shadow play, some kind of game in which there is articulated sympathy for Navalny, but nobody in power does anything meaningful to make that sympathy work. And let's remember the tools of repression that are in Putin's gift. He presides over this, Navalny calls him the Tsar of corruption. He presides over this incredibly corrupt engine, the Russian corruption engine of the Russian economy.
He calls him the incumbent Tsar of Russia as well, even presently today.
Yeah. By the way, this is tough stuff. You know, he's going for it. He knows, and people say, well, why on earth did he go back to Russia? He was in trouble and in danger sitting, doing nothing, watching telly on the sofa in Germany, because they can get to him there. But what they want to do is to try and knock him off without them being responsible. And what's fantastic about the Bellingcat investigation into his poisoning was that Bellingcat showed without a doubt that the Kremlin poisoners had been following him around again and again and again. And eventually they struck last summer and they almost killed him. The reason they didn't succeed in killing him is because brave pilot of the jet he was on landed immediately, even though there was some kind of hocus pocus going on at the airport. He landed.
Emergency landing?
Yeah, emergency landing. And they were saying, oh, look, there's a bomb scare. No. The pilot landed, and then the doctors hit him with the simple emergency medicine that you get. And actually that helped save him life. So he was saved by a Russian pilot and Russian doctors. Good on them. I believe I'm right in thinking that one of the doctors who helped save his life has recently died of a heart attack.
Saw that.
And if I had the freedom to do this, and I don't, I would want to investigate why a doctor, and he didn't look, you know, he's no athlete, but he looked pretty fit in his mid-50s, has died of a heart attack. Bang. It looked pretty suspicious. It looked pretty dark. And by the way, this is not, you know, I'm not being a conspiracist nutter here. Critics of the Kremlin, critics of the power vertical, as some people call it, of the secret state, if they cause it, that secret state real trouble, then they end up falling out of windows or having a heart attack again and again and again. It sickens me. It sickens me. So now I need to go back a little bit. In that I did Russian at school, but I never went to Russia until 1992 in the first years of
Yeltsin.
Yeltsin's craziness, weirdly to do a feature for The Observer, where I was interviewing Anna Friel about some film that she was making, and I interviewed her and got on very well with her and her some of her pals, and we ended up drinking in the Hotel Ukraine on the 23rd floor with our feet hanging outside the window with this massive drop while drinking vodka. This is what Peter the Great did, but I'm giving you some tips for bad behavior. Don't do this at home, watchers of the gown. But anyway, so I got myself to Russia on a kind of weird nonsense story, but I found it captivating and fascinating. And one of the great frustrations of my life is I've never spent there long enough. I only ever go for a couple of weeks, 2 or 3 weeks, and I've got to go back. And so I've never ever burnished my language. I don't speak Russian. You know, I speak gibberish. I don't have it as a language at all or anything like it. So that's frustrating. But nevertheless, I love the place. I love everything about it. It's fascinating. 2000, I go, first of all, I'm working at The Observer, but I'm leaving The Observer. And I do one last trip for The Observer. And I do a film also for Channels 4 Dispatches. And I go undercover to Chechnya. And I see the back end of the Second Chechen War, terrible war crimes committed by Putin, the bombing of innocent civilians in white flag refugee convoys, the use of fuel air bombs, which is basically a fuel air bomb is what you do is you put up a balloon of a kind of petrochemical jelly. You pop the balloon and then it sucks all of the oxygen for the local area out, and people's lungs get sucked inside out. And basically it's like, they call it a vacuum bomb. It kills people. It doesn't knock out buildings. It's a disgusting weapon which should not be used against civilians. And the Russians used it against civilians, and we got evidence of that. And I saw that Putin was a bad man. Then I joined the BBC same year, or starting to work for the BBC. I did a radio documentary which won an Amnesty Award about the Chechens who opposed the Russian occupiers, as they'd see it, who were tortured. And some of this stuff was grisly and grim, as you can imagine. It was horrible. I knew it was going to be grim, and I brought a whole bunch of P.G. Wodehouse books. And what I used to do to stop the nightmares was drink till about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, reading about Aunt Agatha's, whatever it is, I'm losing it now, Aunt Dahlia's Bloke's cow creamer, if you know, all of that stuff, all that Wodehouse stuff. I would drink the vodka and read the Wodehouse books. And by about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, I could put some of this dark stuff I was investigating aside and fall asleep. When I left, my comically beautiful Chechen translator said all of my books were burnt when our house was burnt in Grozny. She was a refugee living next door in Ingushetia. Please, John, can I have your P.G. Wodehouse books? And I gave her all of my 6 P.G. Wodehouse books. So I hope one day that Chechnya might have its own independence and that she could be the press officer for the president. And she would say, hello, chaps, pip, pip, tinkety chonk, because she's perfected her English by reading everything about P.G. Wodehouse. Anyway, from that moment onwards, I knew that Putin was no Democrat, did not believe in the rule of law, was sanctioned massive and obscene violence, and my book was a war.
He's a former KBG or agent in East Germany, wasn't he?
Yeah, and that also, you know, do you return from the KGB? No, you don't. Its successor organization is the FSB. But the problem was in 2000, that year, the West and people like Tony Blair wanted Putin to be the new Gorbachev, a man we could do business with. And so they blinded themselves to the reality, the local reality of what I'd seen with my own eyes and heard with my own ears. And telling the West, telling London and Washington that Putin was up to no good and was not a Democrat, was very unpopular. In London, there were two people who were up for this story, and they were Vanessa Redgrave and Jeremy Corbyn. And so one of the things I felt real contempt for Jeremy Corbyn was that when the Skripal poisoning happened, he took the Kremlin side. He took Vladimir Putin's side against some of the, against, for example, British scientists at Porton Down. I've been to Porton Down, and I know some of the scientists, and I know some of the chemical weapons experts because of work I did about the gassing of Halabja in 1988, I think it was, in Iraq by Saddam. And these people are good people, and they're honest. And when they said Skripal was poisoned by Novichok, I believe them, and I believe in their body of work. They're not fantasists, they're not money people, they're dedicated scientists. And for Corbyn to switch in the way that he had, and I thought was just, he's going with the flow. When Putin was a friend of the West, Jeremy Corbyn had the moral courage to oppose him. The moment by the Skripal poisoning, Putin was no longer a friend of the West, and so Corbyn was becoming his ally.
I hate to interject here, but to what extent do you reckon Corbyn's tentativeness in condemning Russian accountability for that particular atrocity you're referring to, how far would you say Seamus Milne, who was his advisor at one point and has a documented history of, if you like, justifying and buttressing support for autocracies, influenced that sort of tentativeness?
There we go. A bit of advertising. The Useful Idiot. This is a novel about Stalin's Russia, Moscow in 1933. There are two characters in it who, if you're smart, and you are, will work out that they represent Jeremy Corbyn and Seamus Milne.
Okay.
Seamus Milne is, he hosted an event at the Valde Club, which is a kind of Kremlin speakeasy where only Kremlin goons and the precious invitees get to talk. And Seamus Milne is chairing the event, and one of the talkers is Vladimir Putin. And that shows that, I mean, I would never...
They shook hands.
Yeah, I mean, well, I'm not sure, have you seen that clip? I haven't seen them shake hands. I've just seen the two of them.
No, but I say that with a caveat. I read something somewhere that they had this sort of conference thing, and they alleged, so the article in question alleged that they shook hands. Yeah.
Well, I think I would say reported that they shook hands. Anyway, the main image that I've seen is that there's Seamus talking, and then Putin is like two chairs along. So it's that kind of setup. Yeah. So Seamus Milne has his start position on everything is who are America is the great Satan, and who are America's enemies. Obviously, there are problems with Putin, but nevertheless, he stands up to American hegemony, and therefore they're going to give Seamus Milne is going to give the Kremlin the benefit of the doubt. This is dark nonsense, and anyone who goes to Russia and the United States will know it's dark nonsense. So what happened with me was in 2013, I went and interviewed Donald Trump, and I gave Trump a tough time, so much so that he walked out of me. I asked him about his friendship with a Russian-born gangster, and at that point, Trump invented a meeting and walked away with our sound mic in his pocket, and the soundman had to run after him.
And just to apprise you on that point there, have you seen videos on YouTube published by the Trump organization, and they covertly filmed you as well?
No, they overtly filmed us. And I'm a huge fan of these videos by the Trump organization, because there's a moment in it, there's my producer Judith, who 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 forgot that they were being filmed, and we had agreed before that I would ask the questions. We were making a film about Trump's bad relationships with his neighbours in his Scottish golf course, and this was the thing I was interested in. I thought that story was a good story, but it had already been done by an excellent filmmaker called, I think his name is Anthony Baxter, and we were copying that film. I was more interested in Trump's dodgy money. Remember, this is 2013, and Trump was at that time still a joke. He wasn't a serious proposition as the President of the United States. Anyway, I just thought, hell, I'm going to ask these questions. I'd agreed it. Judith, the producer, was irritated with me, and in particular, when I asked my follow-up question,
So I saw that.
which was, why did you buy your concrete from Fat Tony Salerno? And Judith went, oh no, John, no.
Oh no, I
John,
saw
no.
that. Just to clarify for our listeners, Fat Tony Salerno, the Don of the Gambino crime family in New York.
He rode two horses. He worked for both the Gambinos and the and another one, the Genovese.
Yeah.
And he was a big fat mobster. But there's a wonderful man who I got to know called Wayne Barrett, who wrote a fantastic book about Trump, and he dogged. He was a great reporter on Village Voice, which has now gone bust, I think. But Wayne really, really went for Trump and harried him when he was in bed with the mafia. And I interviewed in a film I made about Trump and the mob, which is still up on YouTube. Newsnight, 5 million views, I think, so far, and counting. I interviewed Wayne. I said, well, tell me about Fat Tony. And Wayne goes, Fat Tony was fat. It's great. Anyway, it's a great line. And I got to interview Wayne in 2016, and he was dying of cancer. And I said, how do you feel about Trump? And he said, you know, Trump becoming president. This was in the spring, May, I think. And Wayne went, I'm afraid. And it still gives me shivers to know this man. Here's a story that Wayne told me off camera, which I believe to be completely true, and it gives you something nasty about how Trump's mind works. It's also quite disgusting, so it's an interesting exercise for you whether you run this story. So the tape will now cut. Beep. Okay, here I am. So what happens is that Wayne goes to, or rather there is an opening of one of Trump's casinos in Atlantic City, and Wayne goes along to it, but isn't invited specifically because of all his negative reporting. But he's got an assistant who actually has been challenging, who then went on, what's his name? I've forgotten his name, but he ended up challenging Trump the last election, working with the Democrats to throw over Trump. He was Wayne's assistant when he was a very young and talented cub reporter, like 22. This guy gets in, he manages to open a back door to get Wayne in. So Wayne hurries up to Trump to have a go at him. Trump gets his security, all of whom work for the Atlantic City Police Department. Essentially, they're police officers who, in their spare time, are working for Trump's casino. And they lock him up for the night because he has trespassed. And basically, they've got legal, they can get away with locking up Wayne for a night before they have to spring him in the morning. So that's it's a shitty night for Wayne, but never mind. They lock him up and chain him to a radiator with a man who they know is mentally ill, and he spends the entire night masturbating. And obviously, according to Wayne, Trump would know that. They would tell Trump that. So that it gave Trump pleasure that this guy was sexually kind of humiliated in this way, that his enemy, Wayne the reporter, was sexually humiliated by being locked up with this awful person. That's the kind of soul of Donald Trump. And so when I read, actually listened to the audiobook of Mary Trump's amazing book, which I completely recommend for anybody who's disturbed by this sort of squat toad of a man, Donald Trump. It's completely consistent with the vindictive fuck you-ness of Donald Trump.
Just to revisit the relevant topic at hand, the mainstream media has been reporting on a lot of optimism given the protests that have been triggered since Navalny's incarceration, that there's this new sort of demographic of like anti-Kremlin youth that could potentially in years to come oust the prevailing dynasty in Russia. But according to a survey, presently 51% of Russians aged 18 to 24, and that includes a considerable bracket of people who have never seen anybody other than President Putin, still say we want President Putin. So to what extent do you reckon the press are amplifying the degree of youth support for Navalny?
Good question. I don't get these opinion polls. Remember, you're talking, you know, in living memory, people's grandparents, if they're old enough, will remember 37, will remember the Great Terror, will remember Stalinism, will remember that if you fuck power, power will fuck you big time. So that it's not like here, where somebody with a clipboard says, are you going to vote, you know, X or Y? I remember when I took my kids to Cuba about a decade ago, and Cuba's beautiful and fascinating, but it's also an authoritarian quasi-dictatorship where there is no opposition and there is no proper free speech in the way that we enjoy it. And as I test, I said to the taxi driver taking us from the hotel to the airport in Havana, what do you think to Castro? And the taxi driver says, Castro is a good man, but the people around him are corrupt. We got to London, and because it was a long flight, we're all knackered. We got a cab from Gatwick to Wimbledon, where we then lived. And I said to the cab driver, what do you think about Tony Blair? And he said, he's a cunt. And I turned to my kids and I said, well, we're back now in a constitutional monarchy.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's a very long-winded way of saying, Garrett, that in Russia, if somebody asks you for their opinion about who's in charge of the Kremlin, you're careful. But the much more interesting number is this, that 120 million viewers have now watched Navalny's fantastic video about Putin's bog brush palace. By the way, bog brush is because Navalny's got he's, I think, slightly autistic, and he's got this thing about detail, and there's eroticism of detail in plenty in this fantastic video, him and his team.
Really forensic guy, you can tell.
Yeah, it's kind of beautiful. Everybody must watch it. It's 2 hours, and it's genuinely funny. English subtitles. If you want to learn Russian, it's a great way to learn it. But they dig stuff out, and they find that there's a couple of places which have got bog brushes, which cost 700 euros, and they're made in Italy of the finest, you know, bog brush bristles imaginable, and all of that stuff. Now, 120 million people have seen that. And what it shows is, I find, compelling, damning evidence that Vladimir Putin's cronies have built him a pleasure palace worth £1 billion quid or more. And it's owned by Putin because the presidential security team is there. You can't approach it. If you're on a boat, you have to go, or a ship, you have to go all the way around it.
And just to interject here briefly, Navalny alleges that the revenue acquired to fund this project was stolen from the Russian tax budget, from the Russian taxpayer.
Yeah, I mean, all concerned deny any wrongdoing.
But the Kremlin would deny that.
Yeah, the Kremlin denies it, but essentially, for me, there's a ton of, it's a gorgeous, fabulously gorgeous, but naff place. The killer detail is there's a hooker room, i.e., for hooker pipes, the bubbly, the hubble bubble pipes, and there's a stripper's pole in it, and you just look at it and you go, hello. It costs £1 billion. It's a huge chunk. He managed to get his people pretty close. They flew drones over, so you watch it. You watch the power of the evidence. And I've been there, and I know for a fact that this amount of money and stuff and the security presence, that's Putin's. So they deny it, but they deny it unconvincingly, in my view. Watch the film if you doubt my words. But this has punched through in a way that those three people, Politivskaya, Esmerova, and Nemtsov, have never done. So Navalny has done something really quite amazing in getting himself poisoned. That's a big thing. In proving that the Kremlin, in my judgment, did it. They deny it, but I think the evidence again is compelling, damning against the Kremlin, as does Bellingcat, as does CNN. And then
Bellingcat, the organization in question, which unearthed the identities of the agents who allegedly poisoned the Skripals of Novichok.
Yeah, and then what they did was those two guys. Remember the two guys who said they went to Salisbury to look at the spire?
Yeah.
Was it 123 meters high, whatever it is? They had two fake names, and Bellingcat reverse engineered their photos, and with a lot of effort, and they're kind of crazy, nerdy geeks, but they're wonderful. They found out their true identities. And since then, these two schmucks have vanished off the face of the earth. I'm sure they're still alive. They're running a training establishment somewhere in the north of Siberia, I would guess. What's happened this time around is that Bellingcat used the weird opennesses of Russian society to work out who had been following Navalny in his travels around Russia, and found that there was a number of people who effectively worked for it's called the FSB. The old name is the KGB. Yeah. The KGB's poison factory team have been following around Navalny for about 2 or 3 years, and it's the same people again and again and again, and they're there in Siberia, in the town where he ended up being poisoned. And then brilliantly, Navalny, they work out where their numbers are, and Navalny sits down and runs through the list of all these people. And there's about 20 of them who are in the gig, and most of them listen and know it's Navalny's voice, because he's pretending to be a high up in the security establishment. But eventually he gets through to one of the agents who says, yes, boss, I'm terribly sorry, everything went wrong, and actually gave the mechanism of the attempted murder, which was that they put the poison agent, the Novichok, in Navalny's underpants after it had been washed by the hotel. So Navalny picked up what he thought was a clean pair of underpants, and actually it had been treated with slow-acting Novichok. So when he's on the plane, he starts to die. It's a brilliant, brilliant, brilliant piece of investigative journalism. And that's why, and it's a game changer for me. And I think that the old ways of us, of the West, living with the Kremlin, calling for a reset, that's finished, and we're in a new place.
Yeah. That sort of brings us on quite neatly, actually, to this idea that, well, you've lived obviously a lot longer than us, John, so you'll know that well, life doesn't come with many certainties. That's probably true, but one that we will sure of, one that we are all sure of, that there's a start and a finish to most things. Is that the same for Vladimir Putin, or is he sort of going to defy the rules of nature, if you like?
Good question. So mea culpa. I went to Robert Mugabe's Zimbabwe in 2002, and I went there undercover and reported on how awful it was for actually the black population. We barely...
Just to intervene here, were journalists outlawed from far?
Yeah, we were arrested. We went in kind of semi-legally. We were arrested and threatened with anal rape. And I turned to my producer and great friend, Simon Finch, and I said to Simon, we were threatened with anal rape, and I said, Simon, well, boss, what do we do now? And Simon said, that's the first time you've ever called me boss. Anyway, they kicked us out, and we went back in illegally. Point of the story is, I predicted that Mugabe would fall like the next couple of weeks. And that was wrong by about 18 years or 16 years. Mugabe, he fell whenever it was, 2016, 2017. So the problem is that democracies are way easier to read because so much more information is out and out there. It's not difficult. It's not easy to predict what's going to happen in relation to power, how long Boris has got, etc., etc., before the knives come for him. But in a dictatorship, it's very, very difficult. And the reason is that power doesn't crumble; it shears. Now, I'm reminded by your haircut of the Jurassic Coast, of the fundamental instability.
Listen, I've been, and what a beautiful part of the world, round Dorset near Seacombe, and
Yes.
What's it called?
Golden
Gap.
It's
a Swanage. Swanage, is it, in Jurassic Coast?
Swanage.
Beautiful part of the world, absolutely gorgeous.
So I did a piece, a thing I did, and if ever I became a war reporter, and I used to see terrible things. And what I do is a kind of piece of helping me get back together, was I would get the Observer in my weeks in England to let me do nice stories. And one of those was what's the reason behind the bad geology, behind the rubbish geology of the Jurassic Coast. And I found that there's a professor of geology, I've forgotten the guy's name, but he said, imagine a stack of books, but at the bottom of the books, you've got 3 copies of National Geographic, which are shiny. And the thing, and then you can imagine that the book, and that's what's happening, because the rocks above are sitting on this sort of shiny stuff, which slides. And so that kind of metaphor sticks in my mind. Tyrannies do not crumble, they shear. They look solid as anything, and then bang, they go. And everybody, the moment they've gone, everybody said, oh, we hated Putin. Now I'm hoping, and I'm trying to take more exercise and become healthier, that this happens in my lifetime.
Yeah.
But I think that the game changer is that Navalny is seriously brave, and he's turned himself.
And he did win 28% of the vote in the mayoral elections in 2013 in Moscow. That can't be ignored either. So there is some form of electoral support here.
Yeah, there is also that Russia isn't China. The reason I'm optimistic about Russia, and by the way, I may be completely wrong about this, but the reason I'm optimistic about Russia is that Russia is still part of Europe, and there is a European sensibility. And the other thing is, all the oligarchs have got their kids educated in the West, in Britain, in the States, in Europe, and they've come back and they want.
And also, you have to refer here to the economic interdependence between the European Union and Russia in terms of natural resources, gases, and whatever. I think the amount of oil and gas imported the EU, 35% of it's Russian.
That's true. But that number keeps on going down. So that, you know, that's a big thing. I've got I live in London, and I was so anxious about Putin switching off the gas. I have a wood burning stove in my house. And at the moment it's difficult, but I don't live that far from MI6. And there's a dock by MI6, which is a kind of wood trap. And it's all screwed up because they're building a great big sewer there. But what I used to do was go with my dog and pick up bits of wood and saw it, knowing that if Putin turned the gas off, I could at least keep my house and my family warm through the wood burning stove, and I can I can cook coffee on it and everything. But that's, so I get it that we are, and Europe is, and by the way, we are, because if Putin turns the gas off to Europe, that affects us too.
Yeah.
So it's not like, it doesn't matter to us. Of course it matters to us. But essentially, our dependence on oil and gas is bad for the environment, and electricity and wind in particular, but also solar. And I'm in favor of nuclear power, because I don't like who's got the gas and who's got the oil. Russia and Saudi Arabia are not our friends.
But the Bin Salman did shake Theresa May's hand in 2018 outside Downing Street, and continues arms sales to Saudi Arabia with aerial bombardment of Yemen.
Yeah, I mean, but so
the question of friends here is quite difficult to navigate in this context.
These are people who are unpleasant, who the reigning policy is that we've got to, it's better that we don't piss them off, because they can turn off the gas and that would be bad. In reality, they can't turn off the gas, because if they turn off the gas, then their own money supply will fall too. So I think we're in a stronger position than we think we are. And also, I think I'm looking at the future too as well. But I also think this is a moral issue.
Massively.
It just so happens that you could have we could be, if we said to Putin, right, we're going to disconnect the ruble from the major Western currencies, that would cause him trouble. Now, what I'm advocating here is that we send a clear message, not a fuzzy one, a clear message to the oligarchs who prop him up, that actually your view at the moment is that your money and your lives are safer fawning over Putin than not. And what the West should say clearly is no, recalculate, because actually your money and your lives will become more miserable if you stick with him. And that would create this kind of geological shearing, which I'm hoping would happen, along with what Navalny is doing. Now, is this pie in the sky? I don't think so. I think that Navalny has, through his courage and his humor, has created a game changer, but I'm completely open to the possibility I might be dead wrong about this. But
yes, because the Financial Times did say in 2019, they reported that the sanctions issued by the international community, namely NATO nations, amidst the invasion of Crimea, initially it did have a crippling effect on the Russian economy. In 2014, we nearly saw it go into collapse. But as of 2019, we have seen a pretty considerable comeback. But obviously, we do have to take into account that was done through a series of austerity measures by Vladimir Putin.
My view is that sanctions are easily gamed. And how effective are these sanctions if, for example, people who were seriously close to Vladimir Putin, like Abramovich and Alisher Usmanov,
Well, sorry, just to interject, you have to also ask how serious are the sanctions when the incumbent Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, who many of the commentariat regard as the least competent government minister of all time, take £30,000 donations to Kremlin-linked money?
Which oligarch did he take the money from?
You know Kerimov, who owns all those sort of shell corporations in the British Virgin Islands and are related to Chernukin?
So there is there are circles and circles of influence. The big two in my book would be Abramovich and Usmanov. They own Chelsea and Everton. There's a clue there, folks. Yeah. Okay. Usmanov part owns Everton, but these are big British teams. And what's going on? So what's happening is Putin can use an array of pressure on the Russian opposition to terrify them. And those measures include murder, poisoning, harassment, endless legal botheration. So if the West is to stand up for democracy and the rule of law, and people like Navalny, who, by the way, we've got to go into, he's not perfect, and I want to talk about that. If the West is serious about belief in the rule of law and things like freedom of speech, then we've got to stick it to the big wallets, Abramovich and Usmanov. We should also look at, so a question I would like to ask if I was a member of the House of Lords, I'm waiting for the offer, is this. Baron Siberia, Yevgeny Lebedev, friend of Boris Johnson, why are you silent about what's happening to Navalny? Are you a British lawmaker, or are you in reality an agent for a foreign power? Yevgeny Lebedev would deny this, but he hasn't said a word about Navalny's poisoning,
Johnson,
or about his arrest. Why is that then?
And this is Johnson,
Lord Baron Siberia.
Yeah.
Johnson was good and Skripal in saying this is wrong, but remember, he's got to do that. The problem is he setting out effective policies to push that through in a language with a firmness and a clarity that that the Kremlin requires? And the answer to that is no. So what we're getting is forked tongues. Naughty Kremlin, don't do that. But actually, there's no effective sanctions at the moment. The sanctions are a kind of shadow game.
So just to move on to your aforementioned point on Navalny not being infallible, we see that the corporate press and the rest seem to be arguably slightly selective in their coverage of Navalny, particularly when it denotes to his sort of past toying, because we know he hasn't made xenophobic remarks in about a decade, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So I was listening to a Russian podcast made by some Americans, and they used the present tense. So people listening, what happened was, I think around 2008, 9, 10, Navalny and I talked about cockroaches in relation to
the Northern Caucasus population of Georgians, the Islamic,
who were essentially these are people who historically who lived under Tatar occupation, became Muslims, and are Muslims, in particular the Chechens, and the Chechens are the ones everybody heard about. I have an enormous soft spot for Chechnya, and everything is super complicated. Every time I went to Chechnya, I got really quite drunk on the amount of vodka proper Muslim Chechens threw at me. So it's not Saudi Arabia. However, I find the language that Navalny used distasteful and wrong. To be fair,
he also then did he make an advertisement? Sorry, interject again. Seeming to depict to be a dentist or something, to make some
Yeah.
pejorative reference to immigrants. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah. You're right. It's something about root canal treatment, and the idea is that you've got to take out the rubbish. It was bad stuff. He hasn't repeated it. My view is what happens is in around 2010, he gets a kind of John the Baptist. Sorry, it's not John the Baptist. It's Saint Paul. I'm forgetting my Bible, and I should never do that with people from Northern Ireland. He got anyway. He gets banged up with the Liberals, and the Liberals say while he's in prison, and the only interesting place to be.
Is it road to Damascus? Road to Damascus conversion.
Yeah, the road to Damascus. Thank you very much.
Yeah,
if you can hit me with the precise chapter and verse, I'll be obliged. It'll be Luke something. People in Ireland will know. Anyway, so there's this moment where he gets it, and what's important, what matters to him, is the rule of law. And if you believe in the rule of law, you have to believe in equality. Everybody is equal under the law, and that means Muslims and Christians and atheists or whatever all are. And the way he goes for against the corrupt now is fantastic, and he's left that language behind. Now, for me, I'd prefer it if he said, that was wrong and I was wrong. I think partly it's his personality that prevents him from doing that. But I have to say that you can only talk about Navalny's bad language in terms of xenophobia in relation to language that he used a decade ago. And at the same time, if I'm thinking about somebody who is seriously xenophobic, then I would say that poisoning and murdering a British citizen.
It's just I find that slightly interesting, John, because of how profoundly critical you were of Tommy Robinson, Tommy Robinson's a pseudonym for people know, who is mastermind of the White Nationalist Front, the EDL in England, whose actual name is Stephen Yaxley Lennon, who arguably seems to be analogous. Well, not now, perhaps, but the remarks he made and his sort of ideological ethnocentric philosophy was analogous, arguably, to Navalny's a decade ago.
Well, the difference is one of years. Well, Navalny hasn't said anything like that, to my knowledge, for 10 years. Since then, he's got and understood that corruption and the war against corruption is the thing, and he's left that language. Tommy Robinson, on the other hand, has carried on with that language, and for example, I did all the terror attacks. I reported all of them for the BBC in 2017, and he was using that language at the worst possible moment. The other thing I would say is that Tommy Robinson has not been poisoned by the British state, and he's at liberty. By the way, I believe in free speech, and I believe that Tommy Robinson, I really don't like him as a human being. I'm actually on record as calling him a Nazi cunt. Part of that was a tactical thing, because when you're attacked by the far right, they smell fear. Now, I wasn't afraid of him, but the BBC bosses who managed me were afraid of him. And
because this was in the midst of post-Brexit polarization.
Yes. So what happened was that, to explain why this is important, is that in 2019, I was asked to do a panorama on Tommy Robinson, and we didn't have anything. We had no good journalism on him, and that was because the bosses didn't put enough resources into the program. And there were a series of problems with it. Anyway, it ends up that I interview this woman who used to be a Tommy Robinson supporter. She fell out with him. Tommy Robinson sent his online hate machine after her, after they'd fallen out. And one of the threats that she got was that we're going to give you an acid facial. Now, I find that so awful that I couldn't believe that actually I couldn't believe that she did what she did, which was that she secretly filmed me whining and dining her. Now, what I'm doing here is I can't give her a penny, and I never would because I work for the Observer. What I can give her is, and she wanted a nice dinner, 2 nice dinners, lots of drinks, and a sense of confidence that the BBC would stand by her.
Which will clarify to our viewers, you paid for despite the mainstream media narrative.
Anyway, the consequence was that I was foolish to trust this woman, although the analogy I use that she was like Nancy in Oliver Twist, in that she both knew that Bill Sykes was a bad man, but was still a bit in love with him, or something like that. It was very, very dark. But what happened was that Tommy Robinson got this footage of me behaving foolishly, and I apologize for that. I apologized for that in the moment, and I was daft and stupid to do so. But it was an honest mistake of a reporter doing his kind of job. And so I don't apologize for that. What we did was that we then, actually I found this footage of Tommy Robinson talking about for too long the German people have lived under the guilt of Adolf Hitler to the German far right in Bavaria. And I think the money behind this, I suspect the money behind this was Russian. And the BBC wouldn't broadcast the film. And this left me in an awful position that I was being physically threatened by his supporters as I walked around the streets of London and Belfast. And I couldn't reply because the BBC management wouldn't run the programme. In particular, I met Lyra McKee at the Perugia Journalism Festival. I was, as ever, it was the evening, I was with some great friends, I'd had a drink. She was with Owen Jones. I know Owen a bit and I like him. I don't agree with him on much, but I like him. And I took the piss out of Owen, and Lyra gave me a bit of a verbal slap, and I said, come and join us. And so for half an hour, 45 minutes, maybe an hour, Owen and Lyra sat at our table, and we had a wonderful and funny conversation. She was a hero to me, spiky, full of fun. Then what happens is the Tommy Robinson disaster takes place, and then she's murdered, killed. It was an accident. Whoever fired the gun didn't care about killing somebody. Obviously, I don't think he meant, I'm guessing it's a man.
No, I think somebody, given the community reaction that night in Creggan, somebody was bound to die. But as we're approaching our last 5 minutes here, and
yes,
all in solidarity, rest in peace, Lyra McKee, obviously a major figure.
But I went to her funeral, and I was physically threatened by one of Tommy Robinson's supporters as I was leaving the funeral, and that was the kind of pressure I was under. So I feel cross with the BBC that they didn't run the film. At the same time, life moves on. I've done this Hunting Gillen podcast, which has been a success. So I think I've made my point that I'm still a
well done. We've both watched it. It's brilliant.
Yeah.
Listen to it. It's a
listened. It's those two terms. Come on, John. Here. Those two terms are almost interchangeable, but we're coming on to our last 5 minutes here, and I just want to ask 3 pertinent questions here, because we know that WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is presently, well, according to UN Special Rapporteur on torture, is being tortured in Belmarsh prison for exposing NATO supreme war crimes. What is the difference between him and Navalny? Because this is really ultimately comes down to a debate on freedom of speech, really. And I believe both stand for freedom of speech. So how is there any moral equivalence there? And secondly, as well, after that, this is quite heavy content because we're running out of time here.
Can we extend the time? Why don't we extend the time so I can answer these questions properly?
Yeah,
Okay, let's give ourselves another 10 minutes. I'll answer that question first of all. So I did a film about Assange for Panorama, and I stand by it. Assange at some point became, according to his one-time possible biographer who wrote a piece in the London Review of Books. I think it's Sean O'Hagan or Andrew O'Hagan, I forget which of the two O'Hagans, but he said that Assange became obsessed with me, hating me. But I can remember watching the original stuff of the helicopter gunship shooting down civilians in the Iraq War, which Assange and team produced, and thinking this was stunning and incredibly brave journalism of the highest order. And I salute Assange and his team for that. What happened subsequently was he got very angry and paranoid and a bit crazy about the Americans' reaction to the extent of the leaks in a way which was wrong. And he lost his moral compass. He then started leaking stuff, which without thinking about the consequences of the people implicated. And this is from some of his members of the team, for example, Daniel Domscheit-Berg. And then he became so angry with Hillary Clinton in particular that there's strong evidence that he helped facilitate the attack on American democracy by the Russian secret state. Now, you've already listened to what I think about that, about the KGB. I'm not on their side. So there is a complete difference in that I think Navalny stands for the rule of law, which is denied in Russia, and by late Assange, who ended up on Team Kremlin. Having said that, I was pleased that the first British judge who heard the case thought there were good human rights reasons why Navalny should not go to the United States. So my hope is that the next level of British justice agrees with the first judge, and that sooner or later Assange is free to go about his business in Britain and is not does not go to the United States. But I don't
Which
like.
he would face 175 years in prison for journalism.
Well, face is a long word. Sorry, there's a lot of meaning in face. But what I'm saying is I don't want him to be sent to the United States, and I hope British justice does that. Do I think he's the same as Navalny? No, I don't. I've also spent time in Sweden, and I met people who knew some of the
rape charges,
the victims, and I think, by the way, he was foolish because Sweden wouldn't expatriate him to the States. It's crazy for him to bet on whichever South American embassy was it, Ecuador, he ended up in. It was foolish for him to do so. Sweden's a better bet. As I said, I do not think the cases are the same. However, I don't want him to be sent to America.
Well, we'll see that in due course with the United States, who are presently appealing that. So the final two questions we're getting on here actually focus on the Anglo-Russian sort of relationship and sort of British media at the present state. The first question is, did Boris Johnson go to Perugia during a global coronavirus pandemic in September 2020 to visit the residency of newspaper proprietor and British resident? What's his name? Forgot his name again. Is it
Alexander? No, it's Evgeny Lebedev.
Evgeny. And
no, he not during the virus. He's gone there repeatedly before, when he was mayor of London, when he was foreign secretary. So, and that is, the visits are disturbing because at least on a couple of occasions, he left his Metropolitan Police minders behind when he was foreign secretary. Now they're there to protect him. So they're Boris famously, according to his former editor, Max Hastings, Max's advice to Boris was,
Daily Telegraph.
Yeah. You want to succeed in politics, lock up your willy. And Boris doesn't do that. So the danger is that he could have been compromated, i.e. sex compromised while he's mucking around underneath a Russian roof. And that all concerned deny any wrongdoing, but that's a real problem. Yevgeny Lebedev's had a lovely dog, I believe called Vladimir, who died 2018, and Yevgeny feared, apparently he told friends, he feared that it had been poisoned by the Kremlin. Why would they do that? Because perhaps that Yevgeny had tapes or something like this of something embarrassing. I don't know. Yevgeny denies it. He denies any wrongdoing. Yevgeny has become a lord. Yevgeny is now Baron Siberia. This is it's a strange story, but the relationship between the British Prime Minister and a Russian oligarch who is the son of a KGB officer is scary.
But the tabloids don't write about it, but they'll write about Jeremy Corbyn's alleged affiliation with appearances in Russia Today.
Well, no, Jeremy Corbyn's did go on Russia Today,
RT.
and I think that's perfectly fine to do that. I think there's been some reporting by the Mirror about Boris and Yevgeny, but there hasn't been enough, and it's something that troubles me. Now, Yevgeny Lebedev remains silent about this. He remains silent about Navalny. It may be completely unfair, but nevertheless, it's concerning. And it feels to me, it's like in the same way, some of the time I feel there were BBC reporters who were told to shut up about Hitler in the 1930s. And I thought, although I've left the BBC, I'm still kind of mentally part of it in the way I think about the world. And I feel as though I, in part, got into trouble at the BBC because I wouldn't shut up about Putin. And Putin's people and Putin's agents do work against the West, against the things we believe in. So therefore, there has to be an element of suspicion about any contacts between Russian oligarchs,
Absolutely,
a KGB officer, and our Prime Minister.
Absolutely. It's just interesting, really, isn't it? Because I was just reading about a lot of your attractors who charge you with, as a journalist, sailing too close to the ship, whatever that means. Is that not what journalists are meant to do? I don't really understand that criticism as such. But anyway, on the topic of the BBC, your former employer, which has faced post-Brexit, would you agree, quite a significant backlash for people who formerly would have been loyal to it, with the launching of Andrew Neil's GB News, which is reputedly meant to take more of an opinionated, orientated angle on its presentation of news affairs, and it is tipped to be a flagship current affairs cable network. Can you see this being an existential threat to the BBC? Because we already know Piers Morgan and ITV, or ratings and viewings are starting to slowly surpass the BBC's.
I obviously fell out with BBC management over the Tommy Robinson thing, and I feel still to this day distressed about it, but I still pay the license fee. I think the BBC is a great thing, and the moment this is over, I'm going to start watching episode 3 of Adam Curtis's latest. Do I understand it? No, I don't. Do I think it's good telly? Yes, I do. I think the BBC is a force for good in the world, and fundamentally, if I only had 3 words, I love it. I don't think that GB News will fill the gap. I think that I believe in a sensible centre in politics is always better than crazy extremes. I'm dislike very much the nonsense of Brexit. I think it was stupid, but I don't think that GB News will. I don't think there's a gap to fill. I don't think it will succeed. I don't think it's a good thing.
You don't think it will succeed? No.
Well, because I don't think that there's a market for it now.
Sure.
I also feel that the virus has taught us, it's been a fantastic corrective. The virus has taught us there is such a thing as society. Mrs. Thatcher is wrong. that the power of the individual, and in particular individuals, to make a ton of money while everybody else suffers, that's old news. And that, you know, when I see my bin men and my post office people, I say thank you very much. The same with the delivery folk. I think that society is coming back with a vengeance, and that people get that. And I think the new man in the White House gets that very much. Weirdly, British government is out of sync. The British government is out of sync with the new reality, which is we got to care about each other. And Putin is, I mean, 2016, I feel there was a poison tide, which was incredibly difficult to live through. And the BBC suffered very much in trying to be fair and decent to stuff which was really, really difficult to manage and report. At the same time, what's happened is we've had Brexit, then Trump. Trump's gone, thank God, and better government is now in play in the States. I think Brexit, all the evidence is that Brexit is turning out to be an economic mess, as everybody predicted it would be. It's going to cost money. However, it also tells us that our European friends are trying to be as decent as possible about it, one are looking after their own economic interests. And remember, their economies put together are 9 times bigger than we are. So I feel that the poison tide of 2016 is receding. The problem for the BBC isn't GBTV, it's things like Netflix, is technology. It makes it difficult. But I happen to know, I know the new Director General, Tim Davie, a bit. He ran the program we did about the Barclay twins, who are the odious, one of them in particular, Sir David, who's recently died.
Read your obituary on, what website did you publish it on?
It's Byline Times.
Yeah, Byline Times. And you've done videos for Byline Times, just to tell our viewers.
Yeah, yeah, and Byline Times is good fun. To be honest, I think it's doing a better job than The Guardian and The Observer, my old paper. It's doing better than them. But anyway, we're almost, listen, I need to go and eat something now. So I want to go, but I would say that despite all of the dark things in the world, the virus, the power of the Russian shadow state, dirty money, all of this stuff, I feel way more optimistic in 2021 than I did in 2016.
John Sweeney, thank you.
Thank you very much.